Good morning and welcome to our GA4 webinar. Very briefly, for those who aren't familiar with Search Laboratory, we're an integrated global digital marketing agency of around 150 people, split between offices in the UK and the US, as well as running campaigns in all the channels. You will see there. A major part of what we do is analytics, and we're one of only a handful of companies authorized by Google to sell and support Analytics 360. Because of this, we have a team of analytics and tracking experts, as well as digital strategists. Your hosts for today are myself, David Slater. I'm the Global Growth Director here at Search Laboratory, and your speakers are Paul Shearing, who heads up our analytics and data science, and Jimmy, who heads up our head of digital strategy. We expect to take around 45 minutes of your time, and broadly what we want to cover initially is the digital landscape in 2022, the measurement problems that we face, some of the key enhancements to GA4 such as modeling and attribution, how this is different to analytics, universal analytics. We'll run through a demo of the GA4 explorations and talk you through why we should use that. We'll summarize, and we have allowed some time for questions. And what I would say here is feel free to ask any questions in the chat box along the way. We'll do our best to address these at the end. And if we do run out of time, what we'll do is come back to individuals. But I hope you enjoy it, take some real value from this. Thanks again for joining us. And I'll hand over to Paul, who will kick us off.
Great, thank you, David. And yeah, fast forward to 2022, and you know, people have got apps and mobiles, and we're in a highly regulated world now in terms of getting consent for cookies, and the browsers are all taking a different approach to cookies also. And that's where Google Analytics has stepped in. So over the last few years, Google have been developing, started as Firebase Analytics, and it was briefly called App and Web, and is now kind of referred to as kind of the new analytics, or GA4. So today we'll kind of talk you through really why, what the big USPs are, and why we should be all looking to get GA4 and using that. So I'm just going to run through some of the big problems I've talked about there in that landscape. So firstly, back in 2005, people you know, didn't have all these different devices. So when you sold something online, you could generally join the dots that and attribute back to those more reliably, shall we say. Fast forward to kind of today's world, you've got different devices. So, you know, I won't dwell on this slide because it's one that I'm sure everyone's seen hundreds of times, but you've got to question the reliability of the attribution of that final sale on a mobile phone in this case. Another big problem is that presented by the way browsers are treating cookies, and most specifically, I think, is Apple, Safari, and what's called ITP. ITP is kind of Apple's treatment of privacy with regards to cookies, and kind of this really took a hold over web analytics, which used first-party cookies in around early 2018. And you know, prior to all this, you know, if you came back on the same device several times, unless you deleted them manually, you could join those dots together, and you could attribute a conversion to all the sessions that contributed. But ITP came along, and kind of starting in about 2018 for first-party cookies. It now deletes cookies after 1 or 7 days. So, well, it limits the expiration to 1 or 7 days. So if somebody keeps coming back on the same device, on an Apple device, you cannot join those dots together because they're given a new ID. So again, some websites have 40, 50, or even more % of traffic coming from Apple devices, and that's a big problem. And finally, kind of the more recent regulation changes that are fast taking hold now, and more specifically is the requirement in most regions to get explicit consent to track somebody using cookies. A lot of people, depending on how you ask for consent, a lot of people say no. So what you get is you're just missing a big black hole of what you're trying to track. And again, you know, if you sell 100 items in a day and you're only seeing 70 of them, that's a huge problem, especially when that changes over time. So yeah, I suppose this last slide is really just to put a big question mark over how accurate is the current data you're seeing in the current analytics or any other platform you're using, and most specifically users, the count of conversions and how it attributes them. And I would kind of say it's not accurate at all. It's more of a benchmark than a measurement. So with the scene set and the problem set, we all understand. I kind of wanted to talk really on the first real big differentiator and why GA4 is very well placed to help deal with them. And modeling really is Google's solution in how it's gonna, or how it can help you get around these problems as well as you can do, really. Before I kind of cover that in any detail, I just wanted to cover on how GA4 will join users together. So universal analytics only ever really joined users together based on a client ID, which is an ID in a cookie that gets deleted or doesn't work across device. GA4 now has the ability to select if you wanted to use these three on the left. So user ID, if you've got a CRM ID, an authenticated login, and then Google's got this concept of Google Signals, which is basically anyone that's logged into a Google device. Google has the ability to join the dots across device effectively. So the order in which it will join you together is if you've got a user ID, so if you're logged in, it will use that ID because that's the most reliable, of course. If that isn't present, it will use Google Signals, and that's only for people who are logged in on Google devices or accounts and have given consent to be tracked. So Google aren't tracking people without their consent, so to speak. So yeah, that's kind of how Google can join the dots together. And so with respect to modeling, it has a lot of your website traffic is a subset of that traffic is kind of people who are logged in and who are covered by this Google Signals access. So Google can see people on different devices and join the dots together, even though it doesn't kind of present that back to us as a user. It can model it and present it in the reports. And this kind of construes this observed data. So Google's got the ability to see all of these joined together dots and present that back to you. And what it uses then is it kind of models that data and the conversions and the attribution paths based on what it knows from its signed in observed data into your entire data set, so your model data. And ultimately what it comes down to is it gives you a much more accurate idea of where your sales are coming from and what your conversions really are. So to be a little bit more specific and relate back to the problems I presented earlier, if somebody's got 3 devices, you can see those red dots. That's Google has got the ability to join those together using Google Signals in this case. So it will model those out into all the people that aren't logged into Google accounts, and it gives you a much better reflection. Again, the ITP problem with Safari devices, I don't think this would use Google Signals, but Google can model the data from other sources, and ultimately it can join the dots together from an observed data set and presents that out in kind of your entire modeled collected data set. And the final problem I presented earlier was people that don't consent to be tracked at all. So these are perhaps the hardest problem to solve. And Google's solution to this is a tool called Google Consent Mode. This is a feature of Google Tag Manager. And ultimately what that does is, if you've got Google Tag Manager, your consent tool will feed a signal into Tag Manager, and that alters the behavior of your Google tags. And ultimately, if somebody doesn't give consent, the tag will not set or read a cookie, so you're not breaking any cookie laws. It will still collect that tracking data and those hits, but because it's not joined together by an ID, it will send it into a separate data partition, and it uses that separate data partition to model the full data set. So ultimately what you get is, if you've sold 100 things, you get visibility of 100 things and not the 70% that have converted, which is a big thing really, because that's one of the significant problems people face today. So that's kind of modeling as a concept and how it works. And the biggest area that is captured in is in kind of how it deals with attribution. And attribution, apart from the modeling and the cross-device functionality we gain with GA4, there's a lot of other steps forward. So just to give you a little bit of background, for most of you that are familiar with Universal Analytics, when you look in the main reports within Universal Analytics, all the conversion figures are last non-direct. So the last channel that drove that visit to the website is the one that gets the credit. Google Analytics, Universal Analytics does have attribution tools and DDA if you've got data-driven attribution if you've got 360, but they're in a separate kind of multi-channel funnel section, and they're kind of a separate, isolated kind of set of reports. So good, but not as good as GA4, I suppose. So that kind of brings us on to one of the key differences with GA4. It is a property level setting. So for your GA4 account, you'd say, well, I want to use this type of attribution model. You set it at the property level, and it will apply across all of your reports, across all of your analysis hub that you do, that Jimmy will show you shortly, and any data you get out of the API. So that's a big major difference, and a lot of people will find that much better, really. There's several model types, and the big thing is data-driven attribution is available to everybody. So it's not a 360 only feature. Everyone can set that up, as a property level feature, and it will be available across all of your reports. Other standard models are available. Your kind of first-click linear position-based, and a big thing is it will exclude credit from any direct touch points, which some of the attribution modeling comparison tool in Universal didn't. So yeah, that's that. And of course, don't forget, it uses this model data that corrects for cross-device and ITP and so on. So long story short, ultimately what that comes down to is a much more reliable, accurate and trustable conversion figures. And some recent analysis we did showed a fairly dramatic swing on some channels, especially if they're kind of upper funnel channels. Just to touch on the DDA kind of methodology that is used, it's kind of based on the old kind of Shapley value of the old Universal Analytics, but they've gone back to the drawing board, and they've kind of introduced a much kind of improved methodology for doing that. They've published this. They're very open and transparent with how that works, and you can all go and read the paper if you wanted to. But they've added a number of improvements, and so it kind of looks now for things like the closeness of a touch point to a conversion to see how much weight in that touch point should get, and it does things like a correction for unresolved paths. So if you look at a set of attribution paths, some of them are, at that point in time are going to go on and convert, but you can't assume the non-converting path just because they haven't converted yet. So there's lots of improvements is the thing. So modeling attribution, two big major steps forward for Google Analytics and for kind of the digital kind of ecosystem. I was just going to touch on a few other of the kind of key differences, really, and then I'll hand over to Jimmy. He'll run through some of the reports and that side of things. User ID, I've talked about this already, but just to touch on it, because it's kind of, it chooses the best ID. It's not, you don't get a different silo. So you've got a user ID view and a client ID view in Universal Analytics. You don't have that. It's just one data set that uses the best ID, and that's great for kind of a long-term customer. So if you've got an ongoing relationship with customers and they keep coming back and signing in, GA4 will be much better at showing you that ongoing relationship, because you don't get people dropping off for losing cookies and so on. And if you're doing clever first-party marketing, you can load in dimensions from your CRM, etc., and they will stick to that user and be good for long-term clever kind of marketing. I was going to touch on the different kind of architecture, the different kind of architecture. So Google have gone right back to the drawing board. It's not just an incremental kind of improvement to Google Analytics. They've gone right back to the drawing board and re-architected the whole kind of platform, really. So everything is a event in Universal Analytics. In Universal Analytics, everything was based around a session. You collected things that belong to a session and you aggregated data at a session level. Whereas GA4 is, everything is represented by an event, and with those events you can track various parameters. Out of the box, you get quite a lot of automatically tracked events. I've shown some, but not all of them for a website here. There's lots more for, especially on the app side of things. But even things that were represented in Universal as a session kind of record in the underlying data set are represented now in events themselves. So a session start event is how it counts sessions. First visit, it kind of internally tracks an event for that. And because of this kind of simple event-based architecture, it gives a huge ability to customize the implementation. So you go back and think, for my app, my website, these are the things that occur and these are the parameters that describe that event. And I've given just a flavor of the types of things I mean there on the screen in front of us. That's not to say sessions have been forgotten about. There's still a thing, especially less so on an app, and that's really why GA4's moved away from the concept of a session. But there is on the roadmap the concept of a session scope custom dimension, and like I say, it counts them using the session start, and users are certainly first and foremost one of the primary things it's focused on, really. So you've got the ability to load up custom dimensions and through this concept of a user property. So yeah, just I suppose to summarize, really, that whole new architecture, what that gives us is a much faster tool, because it's easier to interrogate and query that data. It's much easier to implement because it's conceptually simple for people to get their head around and discuss and design. And that ultimately, that easier understanding means it's easier to do. And once you've got used to the new interface and the new way of using the data, it's easier to do analysis and easier to do reporting on. So that's kind of a few of the key differences and a few big benefits. I'm going to hand over now to Jimmy, who's going to take you through a demo of the explorations.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy. As Paul said, I'm going to take you through a bit of a demo of the interface itself. So you might be familiar with explorations if you are a GA360 customer. So this is a free-form analysis. In GA4, this is available by default for free in the basic version. So this is quite a big step change, and it's really useful, and there's some extra reports in there. So what I'm going to do is just take you through a couple of those now. So you should be able to see my screen now. So this is the Explorations homepage. So there's the standard reports, and you would navigate to that on the left-hand side there. So as I say, you can go to these different reports. So I will just bring up a report that's a funnel. So that, I suppose before I go into the detail of this particular funnel, I just wanted to mention that this is it's actually a really good feature and a big enhancement from the funnel that custom funnels, for example, that you would have in Google Analytics Universal or in the e-commerce funnels. This is because the funnel is created and shows you the information upon the time of query. So I'm querying this data, and it's looking back across the data and building this funnel for me. The difference with those other two funnels that I just explained is that they're based on processing time, so that you won't be able to see any of historic data. As you know, you will only be able to see the funnel from the day that you create the funnel, if that makes sense. So then you have to collect the data to view it. So this is free-form analysis, brilliant features of GA4. So this is an e-commerce funnel. You can do any sort of self-defined funnel. You can see the various steps there that I can define. So these are all from events or events with parameters that you can, as an individual, customize and to build that. So this is Google's merchandise store, the demo account, and you can see here that, you know, this is on the people who first came to the website, their first visit, and then whether they saw a list page of products, whether they viewed an item, whether they added it to a basket, or whether they ultimately purchased. So you can see that, you know, for this one, for example, 20% of people who first came to the website eventually viewed an item, and those are the ultimate conversion rate at the bottom of 1.29%. So you could use this as by way of a means to optimize each segment of the journey. If you're doing the CRO, and you can try to increase these completion rates, I suppose, as they move through your website. There's lots of other features though that you can add to this on the fly. So I could easily just drop in a country into this as well, and it would give me a breakdown for every based on the geolocation, the country of where the users came from. So you can see that's popped out now. And what we're looking for here is big discrepancies in, you know, the completion rates. Obviously this particular merchandise store is very US orientated. It's a physical location on Googleplex, I believe, and you know there's a lot of US users, so it is skewed. This data is skewed toward the US, but you can see that, you know, that there's not many people in China moving through into a list view, for example. So only 3% do. As you scroll down, you can see the breakdown as people move, and again, there's a big variance there of people who ultimately purchase from India after adding to a basket. So there's quite a few add to baskets, but relatively few ultimately purchasing. So if I was the e-commerce manager for this particular store, I would be looking at, you know, if India was a target market for us, then there's obviously an issue with you know, the localization, or there's something wrong going there. So, you know, it would lead to further exploration of why that's happening. So that's one funnel. I'll show you a basic funnel as well. So this is a two-step funnel for the Search Laboratory website, actually. So what we have here, though, is we're using segments. So we've been able to compare and contrast custom defined segments here of whether a user scrolled or whether they didn't scroll. So you can see that, you know, users who scroll ultimately convert almost 3 times better than users who didn't scroll, which is probably not a surprise to anybody. It's a good indicator of engagement. However, this is good proof then that, you know, we could potentially then use this user scrolled segment to enhance our remarketing, for example. So actually, this is the definition of a user scrolled segment, and there's an easy button there that you can share that audience, build that audience, sorry, to track it, and then share that with advertising platforms to then, you know, more proactively remarket to more engaged people, the people who scrolled. So that's funnels for you. The second analysis I was going to look into was pathing. So this is unique to GA4. This is not a feature that you will see in GA360 on Universal. So if you create a first visit, is the definition of the event that will occur. You also then have secondary event of what those people did, but I can actually change that to where did the first visit occur. So that will just load up now, and you can see there that, you know, most hit the home page first, and then you have other different, you know, deeper pages that you can see, and I can pop those out further. But you can see actually here there's actually quite a few first visits that are hitting a page unavailable. So that could be a problem that you know, this particular website would want to look into. So, you know, we can actually do a bit further digging into this. As I say, we can potentially add device to this and then see how this breaks down per device, as we did with the funnels with the country. And you can see here that actually, you know, they've actually got some smart TV visits, and, you know, if you hover over that or click it, you'll be able to see, you know, just the data for those segments alone. And you can see there that the page unavailable, it's not, you know, tablet's not contributing that much to it, and neither is mobile. But actually, as a proportion, it looks like primarily a desktop issue. So again, that is something I would want the developers to go look into. It's like, is it rendering right? Is it you know, desktop optimized enough, or is there more to it than, is it a browser specific, or so on and so forth. So those are a few examples. I'll very quickly touch on the last example. So this is another pathing technique, but you can actually not just do forward pathing, you can do reverse pathing. So if I select an ending point, so this is on Search Laboratories site. So we actually have an event on contact success. So somebody who's filled in a form on our website. So once that loads, you can see that, right, we're starting with just 144 of those events. So I can see where those events occurred. And as you can imagine, it's thank you page and so on. But you can just drill backwards and try to understand what the common paths are, basically, that drove and key pages that people interacted with on their way to converting. So as you can see, this, where we have limited data, I can't show you any of our clients' data for you know, privacy reasons, but you can see that with a lot more information, you will be able to garner some quite good insights into how users behave and how leads are driven, or, you know, purchases are driven in your website. Also, just to note, this is the home page. This page, I can actually exclude that, and it will then focus on the nodes that are not the home page. And potentially you can see patterns emerging in terms of Google marketing platforms appearing quite frequently as a key page that people have viewed on the way to converting. So that is it for the demo. I can hand back to Paul, who can tell you a bit more about what happens now.
Hi, thanks, Jimmy, for that. So yeah, I was just going to take over and a quick couple of slides really around where we are with GA4 or what we should be doing now. And this is this is kind of probably the same advice we would have given about a year ago, but it's just a little bit more urgent and ready now, I suppose. So yeah, so if you've not already, get on with kind of dual implementing and getting the tool implemented. just so you've got data collecting and you can use it when you're ready to. I'll touch in a minute on planning the solution efficiently. So it does need a little bit more thought to do it well, at least up front. But yeah, ultimately get on with implementing that. And I suppose next, really, it's a case of whenever you move from any platform to another platform, there's a bit of reconciliation and checking and QA. Some figures won't match, and rightly so, because it works very differently. We've already talked about the user metric being very different and all the other reasons. So yeah, just throughout this year, spend a bit of time learning and familiarizing and getting the benefits. So you don't have to, turn off one and start using the other on a certain day. You can start using the good bits that are ready and feature rich currently, and as you kind of slowly over time forget about the old platform, you kind of almost wouldn't miss it because you kind of fully migrated over to the new kind of platform. And once that happens, it's a case of just switching over and working towards later in the year, making this the main platform that you report on and use. And so that's kind of the current advice we'd be giving. There are still a few things that there's quite a lot on the roadmap still, and Google are developing the product, and over this coming year and coming months, there's going to be quite a lot added and improved around it. So towards the end of the year, hopefully we'll be ready to start using it as a primary tool. Just wanted to touch on planning the solution, and because it's got this event-based schema and architecture, there's a good need to think before you start implementing things. So whereas in Universal Analytics, you could throw events into the custom event feature, and I'm sure everyone's seen the event reports in Universal Analytics with all kinds of naming conventions going on. With GA4, you've got to really sit down and work out what you're going to track first and design the solution. There's two ways really you do that. You could map what you've got in your current analytics and tag manager and map it into a good design, documented design, or you could take it as an opportunity to go back to the drawing board and just think from scratch how we're going to do this. Just for those that are implementing Universal Analytics through GTAG, there is a feature to kind of auto upgrade that doesn't really need any code changes. And there's a few rules that it follows to do that, but that's worth considering. If there's some kind of barrier to doing it, just get in there and do it now. It's better to have some features and numbers in there than wait. But yeah, there we go. So get on with planning it and start using it, really. I'm going to pass over back to Jimmy now.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, I'm just going to go through a bit of a summary of why should we use it now. So this is a bit of an example to give a broad view of why, basically. It's using an example of a user's journey. So this could be any typical journey for, say, an e-commerce website or a lead gen website, where the user goes through various different touch points over a period of time, and the ultimate conversion occurs on a brand search term, and that web conversion value might be worth £100. So in Google Analytics, for the reasons that Paul described at the start of this presentation, we could just see that amount of data, or we'll be lucky if we even see that amount of data from this particular user's journey. And that's due to the different, it potentially occurred across different devices. They deleted cookies, there might have been private browsing, or they might not have even consented on some of those sessions. So Google Analytics Universal might just see a small fragment of that information. Not only that, last non-direct click is the default attribution. So therefore, in all your reports, the £100 worth of value goes against the brand search last click scenario. If we can look at things in an alternative way, though. In Google Analytics, still we could potentially have an attribution model that's different to last non-direct, which might redistribute the credit a bit more respectively to the organic touch point earlier on. So then, you know, if you're plugging Search Ads 360 or DV 360 or Google Ads into Google Analytics, your goal that's associated with that conversion, then the machine will be looking at that path and understanding, well, actually, I absolutely need to push brand paid search. That is a really good driver of a conversion. That is the thing that it will value, and potentially if you know, that could be leading to cannibalization of organic search. Decisions that you would make as a human is, you know, we're doing generic search campaigns, but seemingly they're not performing as well as they actually are in the whole, if you looked at the entire journey perspective, but we don't have that data. So you might inadvertently pull back from undertaking generic search activity in certain areas that you don't perceivably think are working. So the difference with GA4 is we could take that same scenario, and with the modeling techniques and consent mode ability and DDA, we can get model out a better view of that overall journey, so that we can start valuing things more appropriately. We have data-driven attribution, which is the default model in Google Analytics 4. So therefore, by default, Google Analytics will give more credit to the touch points that actually drive value. So basically what we're saying is the numbers in GA4 will be giving you better numbers now than what Universal will be giving you. Again, going back to that, what if you had the goal associated to your ad campaigns, what would the machine be optimizing towards? It would actually understand that generic paid search campaign or keyword was the key driver of value, and therefore optimize toward that. The decisions that you might make then as a human would be, that's, you know, that generic search campaign is doing really well. Let's dig in deeper into that campaign. Can we build it out further? Can we do more things that are similar? Can we get more, acquire more new people through that technique that's the initial touch point? So now, just going on to another key feature that we haven't mentioned yet that's really important for Google Analytics 4 is the native integration with BigQuery. So BigQuery can be your cloud data warehouse, which consumes not only the data, the hit level data, the event level data, sorry, from Google Analytics 4, but also your CRM data or your app or POS. It's limitless in terms of what data you can stream in there and join with the other data sources. So in this environment, you can clean, join, deduplicate users if they have multiple logins, etc. And this platform also has, you know, it's interoperable with many other third-party data technologies and data systems. So you can have a single source of truth and data repository. This allows you to do clever things with it. So, you know, you can prep the data for use cases and segment audiences to then share with, you know, your email provider or your paid media, etc. You can also value users differently, so you could actually predict a lifetime value or score the form fills that are coming into your website as they occur. So what this means in this scenario of this user journey, if we combine the power of Google Analytics 4 with the power of BigQuery, we not only see the full user journey that user took online, but we can join that up with what they did offline. So we can actually then start optimizing towards business level objectives. So what we mean by that is, did the lead turn to a sale? Can we optimize to profit? Can we optimize to a future purchase or a predicted lifetime value? And as you can see, coupled with the power of the data-driven attribution, if we're feeding this back into analytics, we could actually find that that particular path was very valuable indeed, and that we're potentially undervaluing it using the other two scenarios. So then in terms of what is the machine optimizing toward, in that case, it's to things, activities, touch points that provide actual business value, and you can, we're putting a better input into the machine for the machine to then optimize toward potentially leads that become more likely to become a sale. So to wrap up then, that's us. So we do have a few sort of actions that we feel would be very useful in summary. So in a short-term scenario, we absolutely say, set it up now. It's key that you set it up now, because you can start collecting the data for future use and then future migration to that set of data. Also implement the consent mode and get BigQuery streaming. In terms of medium term, you can then use it in tandem. So there's some of the features that we just ran through in the explorations are there and working, and can provide you with quick insights from that particular feature. But you can also use the DDA now. The integration of DDA numbers with the ad platforms is pending, but it will be quite soon, I imagine. And then we also are collecting data for future use cases, like I said before. And then longer term, we're providing a platform for us to migrate to that single source of truth. We'll have the continuity of data and reporting if we've set it up and have a number of months of data collection. And then, as I said, just explained, then you can do the future, the data projects that will enhance the performance activity that you're undertaking and value things better to perform digital marketing better. So now I can hand back to David, who can wrap us up and ask any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, both Jimmy and Paul. I have a few questions here. We'll, conscious of time, we'll get through as many of them as we can, and I think we'll probably end up coming back to a handful of you directly with answers. First one, Paul, I'll direct that at you then. How long does it take to set up, and what's involved in the process?
It depends on the implementation method. So if you're using Tag Manager, it's much quicker to migrate and map in your old tags into your new tags. Anything between a day to a few days, just focusing on it, and it really depends on how you go about it and how far you want to take it. But yeah, ultimately, it shouldn't be a big task if you've got it implemented in a tag management platform.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Google Consent Mode is still in beta. Do we know if this will change in the near future?
I can't recall the exact roadmap for when it will be brought out of beta, to be honest, but I know it's a big priority. I didn't mention before, but the modeling from consent mode isn't live in Google Analytics 4 yet, but it is imminent, I believe. So yeah, it's just a good thing, and it's not just GA4. Consent mode works across all your Google tags, so your AdWords and your floodlight tags and so on.
Thank you. I suspect this will be for yourself as well, Paul. Is it possible to track point of sale and CRM activity in GA4? And if so, how can we implement them?
Yeah, this is something we do a lot of, and it's got a lot easier with GA4. So there's two features of doing of getting offline data into Universal or GA4. Firstly, you can use what's called a measurement protocol, and it's really just the definition of how you get a tracking hit, how you construct that. So you can code that into your CRM when something occurs, like a point of sale sale. GA4's actually got a big improvement in that you can do a data import, so you could load a file of offline events. You could program it so it occurs every night of all your point of sale data, and this file will go, you know, it can spit into GA4 event level data, which it wasn't a thing in Universal Analytics. In terms of native integrations, the Salesforce is a feature of the Universal Analytics 360, and that will be, you know, in GA4 as well. I don't know of any other CRMs, but I suspect there may be, just because of that simplicity of, you know, they've made it possible to do a data import for offline events. So if there's not a native integration, it's a lot easier to do manually now.
Okay, thank you. If using a third-party CRM, are there any native integrations expected between GA4 and CRM providers, given a central idea of GA is optimizing towards business value?
Yeah, I suppose similar to the question I've just kind of said, really. So native integration, Salesforce will be. I don't know of other platforms, but with this ability to do a data import for event level activity, it will be a lot easier to do, and I do see us as a company helping a lot more clients do this manually going forward, because ultimately your CRM now just has to spit out a list of events that have occurred with the data that describes them, and we can take care of the action of getting it into GA.
Thank you. I think we've only got time for a couple more here. Jimmy, perhaps one for you. When will Universal Analytics be removed?
There is no time frame on removing Universal as yet. It's what Google is saying, though, is that all analytics developments and future improvements are all solely in GA4. So, you know, it's kind of it will be there. You will still have access to data, but the message is very much GA4 is the future platform for analytics.
Okay, great. If you were kicking off a project to integrate online to offline data and a call tracking integration such as Infinity today, what would you recommend in terms of whether to implement to UA or GA4 or both?
Yeah, tough question. I mean, ultimately, there's different ways of getting data into both of the platforms. Measurement protocol is a common theme. So I would probably do both if I was honest, because the coding the script into the CRM or to the call tracking platform, or however you're doing this offline activity, would come from, you know, is one bit of code, and then there's just really a little, you know, two little sub treatments of that. So, you know, you've got all the data in the script you're writing, and it's just two slightly different ways of sending that data into the different platforms. So it's not a lot of extra work to do it to both. You know, if you were going to choose one, I'd say put it into GA4, because that's where we're going.
That's great. One more question then. Can you create a custom attribution model?
Right now, there is no customization on the attribution models that are within there. I don't, to be honest, I don't know if that's on the roadmap or not. Given where it was with Universal Analytics, maybe, but I wouldn't like to say either way.
Thank you. Thanks to both Paul and Jimmy there. I think the overriding message that I hope comes across is that companies must install GA4 as soon as possible in parallel with normal GA. There's no penalty for doing that apart from time, and the penalty for not doing it is delaying or completely missing out on all the benefits that Jimmy and Paul have illustrated. We'll certainly arrange for a follow-up email along with a recording of the webinar to be sent to you all, and where needed, come back to you individually on a couple of these questions that we haven't managed to cover off today. In the meantime, we're here to help, whether that's via further consultation or indeed define projects around GA4 implementation. So please don't hesitate to contact myself or the broader team.